Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. I'm your host, Stuart Newsom, and today we're talking about a subject that every healthcare leader needs to start wrapping their arms around: how to govern AI agents in the automated revenue cycle. Now, I know that phrase might sound a little formal, maybe even a little futuristic, but the truth is, this isn't about what's coming next. It's about what's already happening. AI agents are actually here, and they're here to stay. They may evolve into something else, who knows? But right now, they're helping manage claims, predict denials, automate prior authorizations, and even guide coding recommendations, believe it or not. So they're fast, certainly, and they're also smart. And sometimes they're invisible, if not most of the times, they're invisible. And that's why governance matters, because the moment an algorithm starts making a decision that used to belong to a person, the stakes change. It's not just about efficiency anymore. It's about accountability, transparency, and even trust. So, if you've read the headlines lately, you've seen how quickly this conversation is heating up. There's lawsuits against insurers for algorithmic denials, if there is such a thing as algorithmic denials. I think that's a word that was made up by the journalist. But there's also new draft guidance that's being put out by HSS and ONC on AI use in healthcare. Even health systems now publishing internal AI ethics statements. Whoever thought we would say that about AI ethics? Everyone's realizing that the technology is outpacing the policies that should be steering it. So, in today's office hours, we're going to unpack how we can stay ahead of that curve. We're talking about what AI oversight really means in a revenue cycle context, how to structure it, how to assign ownership, how to balance the speed of automation with the safety of human judgment. So, we'll look at some real world examples, both where things went wrong and where governments made all the difference. Now, as always, we'll have a Q&A at the end before we wrap up. And also welcome any comments. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, please put it in the Q&A box here in Zoom, and we'll make sure that we get to that as quickly as possible if we can. It's a long session. If you haven't noticed by now, I'm running solo today. I got my notes ready, so we're going to dive right in. Everybody sound good with that? Always have to ask a question as if someone's going to reply. But at any rate, let's start with the why. It's always with, well, why is this such a big deal? We've been talking about automation for years. Bots, scripts, RPA, digital workers, whatever you want to call it. But what's happening now feels very different. These aren't just macros running tasks anymore. AI agents are now making choices. What claim to touch first? What code to assign? Whether documentation supports particular diagnosis. They're interpreting, they're deciding, and they're acting. And that's where oversight starts to matter, because once a system starts to act on your behalf, the question really isn't, did it finish the task? It's, did it make the right decision, and can we prove it? I was on a call recently with a revenue cycle leader at a large integrated health system, and she says something that stuck with me. She said, I'm not afraid of AI getting it wrong. I'm afraid of not knowing when it does. And that's pretty impactful. It's that it's is what my point is for today. When a process is automated, errors are contained to the person or the moment. But when an AI agent learns from those errors and keeps applying them, that's when small issues scale into systemic ones. So think about it this way. In the manual world, a team member misreads a payer rule. Maybe 10 claims go out incorrectly, right? Now, in an automated world, if that same logic is baked into AI agent, it might touch 10,000 claims before anyone catches on. The efficiency that makes automation attractive is the same factor that makes it risky. We've seen the results of that lack of oversight play out in the real world. The headlines around payer algorithms and denials are just the latest examples. Some insurers were approving or denying claims in less than 2 seconds, literally faster than a human could blink. And those decisions were being made by machine learning models not no one fully understood or that even could understand afterward. There really wasn't a lot of transparency into what in the world they were doing. It's not that the AI was malicious or even intentionally inaccurate. It just was unmonitored. So guardrails, no regulation validation, no one asking the hard questions. Basically, should the model still be making this call? Now imagine the provider side of that equation. We have an AI agent flagging claims for review or routing them straight to payment. It's working beautifully until a payer updates its policy or maybe a modifier rule change. Maybe that agent keeps processing based on that old logic. Now, you wouldn't know it until denials start stacking up weeks later. And at that point, you're no longer dealing with an isolated mistake, you're dealing with an operational cascade. Now, oversight is what prevents that. It's what turns automation from a black box into a transparent system. It gives you visibility into what the agent is doing, when it's doing it, and why. It allows you to log actions, trace outcomes, and intervene when something doesn't look right. But here's the nuance. Oversight isn't about slowing innovation down. It's about keeping innovation safe. The organizations that get this right don't treat governments as red tape. They treat it as insurance, insurance for compliance, for revenue, and patient trust, because that's still important. So the best analogy that I can think of is that I've heard, and it came from a CIO at a regional hospital network. He said, "We've stopped calling it AI control. We now call it AI stewardship." And that's such a good framing. You're not policing the technology. You're guiding it. You're nurturing it. You're making sure it's aligned with your mission. And here's another important point. The oversight conversation isn't just about compliance officers and IT teams. It's also a leadership conversation. You need CFOs, COOs, and VPs of revenue cycle who now have to think about AI like they think about workforce management and payer contracting. It's part of the operational DNA now. You can't separate the tech from the outcomes anymore. They're fused. So when you hear AI governance, don't picture a committee with binders full of policies. Picture a living, breathing process, one that's constantly watching for drift, it's watching for bias, and for decisions that don't make sense. It's a system of accountability, not bureaucracy. So now let's talk about what oversight really looks like inside an organization. So many leaders say that they're building guardrails around AI. But when you ask what that means, the answers can vary, right? So true oversight isn't just a committee or an audit log. It's the discipline of governing an ecosystem of agents that think and act within your workflows. These agents live inside your processes. They learn and adapt. So governance can't be the install and walk away model used for traditional software. Now, during a recent Gartner conversation we had here at Infinix, Navneet Nair, our chief product officer here, made a great point. Most CIOs and CFOs still treat AI as deterministic software, expecting predictable outcomes. But AI agents are probabilistic. They reason, not just execute. That means they behave more like people than programs. And if that's true, you have to manage them the way you manage people. You have to train them, you have to supervise them, you have to review their performance, and retrain when they drift. Can you imagine doing a performance review for a machine? Now, a good example of this is Google. So even Google, and this is something that Navneet noted as well, surrounds its agents with human infrastructure. Teams monitor, refine, and govern behavior continuously. If AI native companies do that, healthcare must do it too. So oversight works best through four pillars that operate as a cycle. You have transparency, you have accountability, you have control, and then you also have validation. Now, transparency means being able to see into an agent's logic, how it made a decision, what data it relied on, and whether that data is still valid. If a denial prediction model routes claims differently this week than last, you should know why. Transparency turns AI from a black box into a visible teammate. And then accountability defines ownership of outcomes. If an AI coding recommendation triggers a compliance issue, someone must be responsible. The most successful organizations assign each agent a human manager who reviews performance metrics, documents the exceptions, and approves updates. It's leadership, not bureaucracy. Then control defines when the human steps in. Every agent needs confidence thresholds, points where it pauses and asks for review. A 95% confidence score might proceed automatically. Below that, it goes to a specialist. This keeps compliance intact and staff comfortable. The message is very simple. The agent extends your reach, it doesn't replace your judgment. And then validation closes the loop. Agents require regular audits and retraining to stay accurate and unbiased. One health system discovered its claim status agent was misreading portal responses after a payer redesign. Oversight caught it within a week, not months. So, validation is how you prevent quiet drift from turning into systemic errors. Now, Navaneeth also emphasized the ongoing work of keeping agents clean. You can't certify them once and assure perfection. They need refreshers and supervision, just like a staff do, and they need domain expertise. A generic model won't understand payer edits, it won't understand LCDs, or even modifier logic. It has to be guided by people who know both the clinical and the financial sides of healthcare. And that's what separates safe automation from risky automation, the partnership between technology and expertise. Now, oversight then isn't an audit checklist, it's a relationship. It's humans and agents working together to keep automation aligned with policy and purpose. With visibility into logic, clear ownership of results, defined thresholds, and continuous validation, you don't just protect your organization, you elevate it. Because in the long run, the winners in this new era won't be the ones who automate fastest, they'll be the ones who govern smartest. So let's look at what happens when oversight doesn't keep up with automation. Now, you've probably seen the headlines. Major insurers under fire for using AI to decide claim outcomes in fractions of a second. I mentioned this earlier. It's payers like Cigna, United Health Group, and Humana. They're all facing lawsuits or investigations. The problem wasn't that the use of AI itself, it was the absence of governments around it. Now, reports from ProPublica and The Guardian revealed that some payers were auto denying claims through pattern matching algorithms. Now, that's the simplistic summary. The big explanation, it was hard for me to understand, and we don't have the time to cover that here in this session. But basically, a claim came in, the system compared it to historical data, and if it didn't fit, it was denied, sometimes in under 2 seconds, like I said earlier. No physician review, no manual audit, and no accountability. Now, when regulators dug in, they didn't find intentional misconduct. They found a governance vacuum. So no one could explain how the model was trained, which data it used, or how those data sets were validated. Oversight documentation was thin. The algorithms functioned as black boxes inside billion-dollar workflows. And here's why that really matters for providers. And it should go without saying. The cases have triggered a broader conversation about the reciprocity in governance. If payers are expected to explain AI decisions, then providers will be too. CMS and the ONC are already signaling new expectations around algorithmic transparency and fairness. So the same scrutiny is coming downstream. So we need to get ready for that. Operationally, the insurer's mistake wasn't adopting AI, it was skipping the middle layer of human review. They built powerful models but didn't pair them with accountable supervisors or transparent audit trails. And that loss of visibility turned innovators into cautionary tales. Now, for providers, oversight isn't just compliance, it's reputation management. Patients don't just distinguish between payers and provider algorithms. If one side misuses automation, trust erodes everywhere. So one health network now practices what they call algorithmic due diligence. Now, anytime an AI workflow is deployed, whether it's coding, it's eligibility, or maybe denial prediction, they write a one-page summary describing what it does, how it was trained, who monitors it, and what metrics trigger review. Now, it is lightweight, but it creates a visible paper trail. So when auditors or board members ask about AI, they can show both performance and governance data. So these payer cases resonated because they broke an unspoken contract. Healthcare decisions should involve human judgment. And when a machine acts alone, people feel that disconnect instantly. So oversight closes that gap. So the takeaway isn't don't use AI, it's don't outsource accountability. So if your system flags denials or auto routes claims, document how it thinks, set human checkpoints, and keep review cycles active. So someday an auditor or a payer will ask, well, how does your AI make decisions? And you want a clear, confident answer. Most organizations already understand this instinctively, but if you have coding audits, peer reviews, or documentation checks, you already know oversight. You're already used to this. Now it's just extending that same discipline to the digital workforce. Okay, so it shouldn't be that difficult to make that transition. So let's look at the other side of the coin where government does exist and what happens when it's done right. Now, there's a large regional hospital network deployed AI agents across its coding and accountables receivable team, and they didn't call them bots anymore. So get this, they called them colleagues. Imagine that. And the way they structured their oversight made all the difference. So each morning, the AR team logs into a dashboard that looks almost like a rounding board. On one side are the human reps, on the other is the digital agents. Each agent has a name. Yeah, exactly. Each agent has a name and a task list and a confidence meter. Now that shows which task it can handle autonomously and which need human eyes. One morning, an agent named Ava, yep, her name's Ava, flagged an unusual batch of denials from a commercial payer. So the pattern didn't look right. Too many of the same codes, all within days of each other. Instead of auto resubmitting, Ava routed them to a human reviewer and noticed that the payer portal wording had changed since the last authorization cycle. So sure enough, the payer had updated its CPT grouping logic 3 days earlier. So Ava caught it because she was trained to detect not just data anomalies, but contextual shifts, metadata of that's in the portal that humans often skim over. And that oversight prevented hundreds of rework cases and what could have become a seven-figure denial issue. So the takeaway isn't about clever technology, it's about discipline. The hospital didn't let the agent run unchecked. They set clear boundaries. When confidence dropped below 92%, Ava paused for review. Each week, the AI operations lead met with the compliance and finance to go over a short report. How many actions she took, how many humans intervened, and whether her logic needed tuning. So the agent still moved fast, but always within those guardrails. Now compare that to a mid-sized orthopedic group that launched an AI system for AR triage. The goal was to free staff from chasing low-value balances. Now, it sounds like a good idea. But for a couple of months, it worked beautifully until denials started creeping back. The model learned that certain payers usually paid quickly, so it pushed those claims to the bottom of the list. What it didn't realize was that they paid quickly because staff used to call those payers right away. Once the AI took over and those calls stopped, payments slowed and denials rose. It had learned from a pattern that only existed when humans were still in the loop. And when the group audited the logic, nothing was technically wrong. The problem was governance. No one had been assigned to monitor drift or check performance after go live. So what started as an efficient project turned into 6 months of recovery work to reclaim cash that never should have been delayed. AI rarely fails dramatically. It drifts quietly. So without validation and oversight, those drifts stay invisible until numbers expose them. The difference between these two stories comes down to stewardship. The hospital treated its agents like a teammate that needed coaching and supervision. The orthopedic group treated theirs like software that could run on autopilot. The same technology, but different mindsets, completely different results. So this aligns with what Navanish shared on that Gartner call, that agent management is more like people management than software maintenance. You hire, you train, you review, you retrain. You don't assume consistency, you maintain it. Now, in organizations that embrace that idea, something else happens. Trust begins to spread. Now, at first, the coders in that hospital were skeptical. They worried that the agent would take away work. But when it caught the portal change before anyone else, skepticism turned into partnership. They realized the system wasn't replacing them, it was protecting them. And that's where the cultural value of oversight shines. When people know there's a clear structure, like thresholds, logs, escalation paths, they feel safe adopting AI. So oversight builds not just compliance, but confidence. So whether it's coding, AR triage, or prior authorization follow-up, the message is very simple. Agents perform best when they're treated like accountable teammates, not anonymous code. They need monitoring, coaching, and clarity. And when that structure is in place, AI stops being a mystery and becomes an ally. Now let's talk about what good governance looks like behind the scenes, not in policy binders, but in real everyday operations. Now, when people hear AI Oversight Committee, they imagine a formal board meeting full of charts and acronyms. And in reality, the best oversight groups in healthcare are small and practical, more like working sessions than compliance hearings. Now, one health system described theirs as a standing huddle of leaders from finance, compliance, IT, operations, you name it. They don't meet to theorize about AI ethics, they meet to solve what's in front of them. Maybe the coding assistant agent started suggesting different levels of service, or a prior authorization workflow is firing twice. Someone brings the data, someone else brings the context, and together they decide whether it's a technical fix, a training issue, or a policy update. Now, in the early months, those meetings were tense. Compliance worried about exposure, IT worried about blame, and operations worried that the agents might create more work. But once the group found its rhythm, reviewing logs, tracking exceptions, retraining models, that anxiety turned into curiosity. The questions got smarter. Is this model drifting? Or is its assumption still valid? Are our teams using it the way we intended? That's when oversight starts working. So the structure itself isn't complicated. Someone from finance or operations usually chairs it. Maybe compliance keeps notes. I don't know. Maybe IT supports data pools. The point is necessarily not who runs it. It's that everyone owns a piece of risk or performance, has a seat. So one leader described their committee as half compliance, half coaching. And I love that phrase. Oversight isn't about catching what's wrong, it's about helping the system improve. So every quarter, they do what amounts to an employee review of their agents, looking at accuracy, exceptions, and downstream impact. And when an agent underperforms, they don't shut it off. They retrain it, they document it, and they watch for improvement. That mindset, which is accountability with adaptability, keeps governments constructive instead of punitive. Now, over time, something else changes. The tone moves from fear to opportunity. Instead of, what if this goes wrong? The question becomes, where else could we safely use this? Government shifts from restriction to enablement. And when that happens, oversight stops being a speed bump and becomes a launch pad. These meetings also give space for ethical questions that don't always fit in daily operations. If an algorithm seems to prioritize certain patients or payers, someone can raise that concern before it becomes systemic. When multiple perspectives, whether it's financial, clinical, or technical, come together, you catch those subtleties early. And ultimately, a stronger governance group becomes more than a checkpoint. It becomes part of the organization's operating rhythm. It ensures agents are performing, that they're compliant and aligned with the mission. And it signals to staff that automation is under thoughtful supervision. Now, when people see that, their trust in AI grows. Teams are more willing to experiment. Leadership is more comfortable approving new pilots. And the organization builds a reputation for being both innovative and responsible. So that's the real mark of good governance. Not how many meetings you hold, but how confidently your people move forward, knowing someone is watching the details. Now, at some point in every conversation about automation, someone inevitably says, AI helps us work faster. And it certainly does. But speed without oversight is just acceleration. And in healthcare, acceleration without direction usually leads to risk. The challenge right now isn't whether AI can do the work. It certainly can. It's whether it can do it fairly, transparently, and compliantly. And not just a technology question, it's a leadership question. So healthcare has always been held to a higher standard, mainly because what we do affects people's health, it affects their finances, and their trust. So when you bring AI into that equation, you're not just changing the workflow, you're changing the ethical framework around how decisions get made. So one of the most striking trends in the past year has been the number of professional bodies weighing in on this topic. The American Medical Association issued guidance on ethical use of AI in healthcare, emphasizing human accountability and the need for explainable algorithms. The ONC began outlining expectations around algorithmic transparency and bias mitigation. And CMS, in its push for interoperability and digital modernization, has started referring to AI oversight in draft discussions about payment integrity. So if you read between the lines, all of these point to the same core message. You can automate, but you can't abdicate. No matter how advanced your system is, the organization deploying it remains responsible for the outcomes. That principle is becoming the backbone of healthcare AI governments, and it's shaping how organizations think about oversight. Now, a few months ago, a regional health system published a report about how they audit their AI tools. Every new model they deploy goes through a three-part review. First, for technical accuracy, second, for compliance alignment, and then lastly, for ethical impact. And in that last step, they literally ask, could this algorithm unintentionally disadvantage a group of patients or a bias of our financial outcomes? That's a question few teams were asking even a year ago. And this is where the culture piece becomes so important. Governments can't live only in policy manuals. It has to live in day-to-day behavior. Now, when an agent flags a high dollar claim for escalation, someone needs to ask, why did it make that choice? If a coding assistant tool starts suggesting different levels of service for the same encounter type, someone needs to pause and look under the hood. These moments are where compliance meets conscience. The goal isn't to slow things down, it's to keep them safe, because efficiency only matters if the outcomes are defensible. And in the current environment, where payer audits are getting more sophisticated and regulators are paying closer attention to AI and billing and claims, defensible outcomes are everything. I think back to something a compliance officer said to me recently in a panel discussion. And she said, AI doesn't break the rules, it amplifies them. If your underlying processes are sound, automation makes them stronger. But if your rules or data are flawed, AI will scale that flaw to an enterprise level before you know it. And that's why oversight is both a moral and operational necessity. There's always a patient dimension to this conversation that often gets overlooked. Patients are becoming more aware that automation plays a role in their billing and coverage decisions. They may not know exactly how it works, but they sense it. And they're asking new questions. Was this denial made by a computer? Who reviewed my claim? Those are fair questions, and healthcare organizations that can answer them clearly will earn the trust that others won't. Now, we've reached a point where ethics, compliance, and brand reputation are all intersecting. Oversight isn't just a legal safeguard anymore, it's part of your value proposition. And when a patient or a payer or even an employee asks, how do we use AI here? Your answer reflects your culture. Now, do you say it runs itself or do you say it runs under our supervision? And there's a big difference between those two statements. Ethical AI isn't about perfection, it's about transparency. It's about being able to explain how decisions are made, to own the consequences when something goes wrong, and to show that you're continuously improving the system. That's what I mean by balance. And the efficiency we gain from AI agency is extraordinary, but so is the responsibility that comes with it. The goal isn't to choose between the two, it's to build a culture where speed and scrutiny can coexist. So when you can do that, when your agents work fast, your government works smart, and your people stay engaged, you get something rare in healthcare. Automation that's not only efficient, but ethical. So where do we go from here? Well, if there's one takeaway from everything we've talked about today, it's that AI oversight isn't optional anymore. It's the foundation that determines whether automation becomes a competitive advantage or a compliance liability. And the difference between the two usually comes down to structure and mindset. So organizations that thrive in this new era don't treat oversight as something that they have to do. They treat it as something that makes everything else work better. Because when you build guardrails, you can move faster. When you make decision making transparent, you can scale it safely. And when you blend automation with human governance, you don't just get efficiency, you get resilience. And one of the things that I love about this stage of AI adoption is that it's forcing healthcare to think more holistically. We spent decades optimizing processes, streamlining, automating, and digitizing. But this moment is about governance maturity. It's about stepping back and asking, what do we stand for as we automate? And that's the powerful question because it invites participation from everyone. It's not just compliance, function, it's not just IT. Oversight belongs to the entire leadership team, finance, operations, clinical technology, working together to make sure that as our systems become smarter, they also stay accountable. So if you're wondering where to start small. Take one workflow where AI plays a role, maybe claim prioritization or coding assistance, and map it out. Who supervises it? Who reviews it? What happens when it gets something wrong? Then expand that exercise outward. Build your government's framework one process at a time, and let the culture of oversight grow organically. Oversight doesn't have to slow you down. Done right, it accelerates trust, and trust is the real currency of automation. Now, as AI continues to evolve, as we move deeper into what Gartner calls agentic ecosystems, the organizations that will lead aren't necessarily the ones with the most sophisticated algorithms. They'll be the ones with the clearest accountability. And that's the future of healthcare operations, intelligent systems guided by human values. So as you go back to your teams, I'd challenge you to think about what your version of the AI oversight playbook looks like. Who's at the table? How do you keep visibility alive after the launch? How do you ensure your digital workforce stays aligned with your mission? Those are questions that are where the real leadership work begins. So I want to thank all of you for joining today's office hours. I hope this session gives you a framework and maybe a few ideas for how to strengthen AI governance in your organization. Now, if you want to continue the conversation, you can always reach out to me and connect on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear how your teams are approaching this. But before we wrap up, let's open it up for some audience questions. I'm going to look and see if we have any. It looks like we have two. We might can answer one because we're about out of time, but I can get to two of them. So the first one is, how can smaller organizations with limited staff create meaningful AI oversight without adding another layer of bureaucracy? So that's an excellent question. And I have to say, the short answer is, start with principles, not people. I think some people get it, the other way around. Even a lightweight government checklist, who owns it, how it's reviewed, how often is it audited, is better than nothing. You just got to start somewhere. You got to start with something, even if it's a piece of paper with that checklist. But that oversight is going to scale to fit your resources, and it's going to evolve. The more you use it, the more you exercise it, the more you flex that muscle, the stronger it's going to get. Okay, the next question is, if a vendor controls the model, how do we ensure transparency and accountability? Okay, so that's another important question, and that's one that actually comes up pretty often. So the key is to make transparency part of your contract. We know the vendor, you may be thinking the vendor holds all the cards there, but it's still processing your data. So you have a right to understand, how it's treating your data. So have it written up in your contract. Ask for documentation on data sources. What is the version history? Even audit trails. Make sure that audit trails, sometimes, I know here at Infinix, we have audit trails that are built into our platforms where you can see exactly the progress of a prior auth. You can see the progress of, say, a document that's been scanned and automatically entered into an EHR. Go on, but you can actually see the progress and have that audit trail. Who touched it? How long did it take to process? Where did it go from there? If they can't provide that, then they're not ready for healthcare. So I don't see any additional questions. So I think what we're going to do now is just wrap up things up. I want to appreciate everybody for joining us for office hours. Be sure to join us next week as we have another exciting episode coming at you. So be on the lookout for the registration link for that. And as always, you can always visit our website at www.infinix.com. And again, feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn.